And today I'm chairing a talk called Textile Intelligence as part of London Craft Week, which is taking place here in London, but also virtually. We have a panel of 4 creatives here whose work involves working with textiles. We have Celia Pym, who's an artist, Lauren Godfrey, who's also an artist, Amber Jae Slooten, who's co-founder and creative director of the Fabricant, who's coming to us from Amsterdam, and Seetal Solanki, who's founding director of Matter, which is an organization which has also put this talk together. And she's dialing in from Lagos. We're going to just say hello to them all briefly, and then they're going to give us a short presentation about their work. So first of all, Celia. Hi there, Celia.
Hi, Marcus.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm delighted to be here. So, as you said, my name's Celia Pym. I'm a textile artist living and working in London, particularly concerned with damage and repair and mending cloth.
And tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing most recently.
Most recently, I've got some work in 2 exhibitions up at the V&A Dundee as part of a show called Sewing Box for the Future, and also in Material Matters at the Textile Museum in St. Gallen in Switzerland. Both shows really about fashion and consumption and care and the industry and materials. And
we probably could have guessed you that textiles is part of your life by looking at the background there. It looks like you've got some kind of loom on our right,
yes,
and a whole bunch of stuff on the wall, including some socks. Can I see?
So this is you're in my studio right now. This is a rug loom, which I actually don't use to make rugs, but I use it to make other kinds of weavings. And this is the studio wall with a variety of things that are in progress and process. But yeah, that sock is in between being darned. I put too much warp on it, and so it's just it's an in-between state at the moment.
It's your washing line, isn't it? Okay, the next speaker is Lauren Godfrey. Hi there, Lauren.
Hello.
Hi, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm an artist based in London, and my work is kind of, well, I call it sculpture, but it ranges quite broadly, from fountains to jewellery to entire installations of exhibitions. It tends to kind of skirt quite close to furniture, so or sort of quasi-useful objects with quite precise uses. Yeah, so it's quite a broad practice, but it's under the umbrella of sculpture.
And so not entirely textiles then?
Sorry, say that again?
But not entirely textiles then, not just...
No, not entirely textiles. And I'm a sort of material user as a whole. So textiles is one of the materials that I use.
Tell us what's on your wall behind you then.
So I've got I'm in my studio as well. I've got some drawings here from a series called Pattern Portraits that I do, which is drawings of items of clothing and sort of furnishings and patterns within books as well, sort of depicting them as a kind of landscape of undulating forms and colour and patterns of abstracting. And then I've got a kind of sculpture in progress. Well, it's a wall sculpture.
No laundry.
No laundry, no. Well, there's my coat.
You can hang that up on the sculpture.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to you in a minute, Lauren. Amber Jae Slooten.
Yeah.
Hi there, Amber.
Hi, Marcus. It's so nice to be here. So my name is Amber Jae Slooten. I'm a creative director of the world's first digital fashion house. We create collections that are always digital and never ever physical. And we try to question what fashion will mean for the 21st century. So we're basically always researching how we can use digital techniques in order to create emotional experiences that will bring people closer together and will be better for the future of the planet and the people. That's what we always say.
And when you say digital fashion, do you mean fashion that has digital textiles and digital things in it, or textiles the fashion that doesn't exist at all because it's all in the virtual realm?
Yeah, it's the last one, which is always a big question for me, like what is existing, right? Because in the digital world, stuff also exists as data, but in what way is it physicality, right? And that's for me always an interesting question because it exists. However, it doesn't exist in a physical realm, like normal clothes would, let's say.
So how do you wear digital clothes then?
I'm going to talk to you about that all in the presentation. It's all kinds of different techniques. So we're researching that at the moment. So it's also a big question that we ask ourselves, like every day, how can we wear it? So we're researching that. And
you don't seem to have any digital laundry on the wall behind you, although if you did, we probably wouldn't be able to see it anyway.
No, exactly.
And you're in Amsterdam, are you in your apartment?
Yeah, I'm in my house. Yeah, so all the way at home. We're working from home at the moment because Amsterdam situation has gotten worse. So we're all back to our homes, but that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, so we're looking forward to you telling us about how to wear clothes that don't exist in a minute. And finally, Seetal Solanki, who's the founding director of Matter, who, as I said, put this talk together as part of London Craft Week. Hi there, Seetal.
Hi, Marcus. Thanks for hosting this tonight. How I would describe myself is, I'm actually normally based in London, by the way, so I'm here temporarily in Lagos. But how I would describe myself is a materials translator, and my practice is very much about humanizing materials, and we do that in forms of building and bridging kinships to the non-human world, essentially, and that is the material world, the immaterial, and also the virtual. And we have a studio practice, we are research-based, and also provide consultancy services and a school, essentially.
And how's Lagos? I mean, not entirely related to the theme of the talk, but how are things over there? I've heard that actually Africa's doing better than Europe in terms of dealing with the pandemic. Is that your experience?
Well, it's hard to really say because the way things are measured here are very different to the way things are measured in the UK or Europe, for example. So I would say it's very easy to walk around here without any hassle, but everything feels very sort of safe to some degree. So I don't feel as confined here, should I say.
And the title of the talk is Textile Intelligence. Tell us a little bit about what that means. I mean, we were talking earlier about how it doesn't necessarily mean that textiles are embedded with technology, but they are an inherently smart thing, or can be.
Yeah, so overall, we're hopefully going to discuss what intelligence means, actually, and that is in the form of alternative types of technologies. And I think textiles, for example, is a really smart material because inherently there are a lot of materials that are, well, textiles that are inherently intelligent because of the properties that the fiber has. And that can be in the form of bamboo textiles being naturally antibacterial, for example. So there's an intelligence within the fiber itself. And it goes that and all the in between. So we're going to also discuss tonight digital forms of textiles as well. And Amber will bring that to the forefront and all the in between, and also the many varieties and, well, the versatility of textiles across many different disciplines. And I think I'll kind of be talking about that within my presentation, I think, in a bit more detail. So yeah, it'll go from something very sort of inherent and embedded to something that's a bit more ephemeral.
Okay, great. We'll look forward to that. So let's go to the presentations now then. Celia, do you want to fire up your presentation and share your screen with us?
Okay, let's try this. Share. So hopefully, can you see my presentation? And I'm just going to check the slides are working. Is it changing to a different slide?
I can see the one with your name on it now.
But it's not changing to the next slide?
It hasn't yet, no.
Confusing. Let me try one more time. One more time. Hello again. Share. You're back on my slide, I hope, my first slide.
See your name, yeah.
And then you see
There we are. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for your patience. So, as I said at the beginning, my name's Celia Pym. I work primarily with textiles and textile techniques, stitch, knit, weave, mainly constructed techniques. I've been exploring damage and repair in textiles since about 2007, and I've got a pretty extensive experience of what I would call small everyday holes, just general wear and tear and fraying. But I've also done really large damage, animal damage, nesting, water damage, fire damage. My interest in this conversation about damage and repair, though when I started, it wasn't framed that way. It started with this sweater. So this piece of work is called Rowley's Sweater, and it's from 2007. And what had happened is my great uncle had died, and I was already working with textiles, but my great uncle had died, and my dad found this garment and he said, "You like things that are a bit off, a bit wonky, Celia. Why don't you have this sweater?" And he was absolutely right. It's a hand knit garment. And what struck me was that the forearms were completely worn away. And towards the end of his life, my uncle, who was a painter, used to sit in an armchair, lean forward on a drawing board and draw all day. That was pretty much what he did all day. But when I saw this garment, so that had been the last 5 years of his life, I saw in that wear and tear the precise movements. It was very evocative of the movements of his body. And I thought, oh, there's something in that about the garment being a translation of the movements of a body, or holding some clues about the body of the person in it. But the second thing about this particular garment was it was already mended. So it was mended in multiple places, sometimes with strings, sometimes with bits of patches by his sister. And that I found far more moving, weirdly, than the grief I was feeling about my uncle, because she had died almost 10 years earlier. And I was struck by the quality of small acts of care and the quietness of this kind of, care. So I mended it, and I mended it in blue. I just went and looked up darning. I'd never darned before. I certainly hadn't been taught it in school. I just looked at a diagram, actually a diagram from 1878, I think, from the Dictionary and Encyclopedia of Needlework. Sorry, the Encyclopedia of Needlework. Anyway, so the blue, this was my very first attempt at mending. 2010, I came across this sweater. It's from Animal Sunburst collection. To date, it's still the biggest piece of repair I've ever done. I mended it in white. I was really curious to see to make the damage visible, to make it completely seen. I loved the way the white interrupted the pattern. I loved the way the damage and the repair combined had sort of softened the form of the garment. And I think for me, a big thing about textiles is softness, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So in this investigation of damage and repair, it's taken me to meet, I'm really curious about real holes. So I'm always asking people, show me your holes, show me what you've got, let me see it. And this work is called First One's the Best, and it comes from a residency at King's College London's dissecting room. I'm only going to talk briefly about this, but the dissecting room is where students learn anatomy on real human cadavers. It's an extraordinary room. And me and the head of anatomy partnered, and we put mending, again, for this feeling of softening, literally into the heart of that dissecting room. And I was there 3 days a week working, mending the garments of the students. But the room, just to give you a picture of it, is 90 bodies, donor bodies, 130 students, and then satellite staff, me, all the rest of the staff of the team. And between the jobs I was doing with the students, and because they were all learning so much, I decided I would practice darning. And I had tons of socks left over from an 2012 Olympic project. And so I was cutting into these socks to practice my stitches as a demonstration, a conversation about skill, because what they were learning was so skilled. And I was thinking a lot about, how do you demonstrate your skill, show your wares off of what you can do. So these are my practice socks from that, or 2 of them. There are actually 60 of these socks. So this is just a sample. But what I loved about this is how the socks became so unsporty. And this is my last slide. This is Bill sweater. So one of the things I wanted to mention very briefly is the surprises of the work for me has been that as I said, I'm constantly asking people about their clothing. So I'm interested in real things, real garments, garments that have lived on people. And this was a commission for the V&A Women's Hour Craft Prize in 2017. I was shortlisted for the prize. I was constantly returning. I was mending garments and returning them to people. But there was a long conversation in between, and I wanted somehow to share a portrait of the owners of the garments. So I took this portrait, but when I asked Bill about this sweater, we ended up talking about his wife, again, who had died. And I would say that it was so touching because you start by talking about something practical. How can I mend this sweater? Do you want it mended? And you often end up in more emotional territory. That's been my experience. So maybe I'm a nosy person, or I'm just interested in the lives of others, but by asking about these clothes and garments, I get access, a very privileged access to people's lives. Bill came to this exhibition. Bill sadly died at the start of this year. Bill came to the exhibition at the V&A and he was a star. It was just one of the most exciting nights. So what I'd like to say generally about textile intelligence is that I think my thought is that from my point of view, it's a conversation about materiality and skill, and that textiles have a lot of emotional intelligence to teach us through the way we know them against our skin and against our bodies. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thanks, Celia. You talk about emotional intelligence, and I guess also those particular garments that you showed have some kind of quality of memory in them. Like we talk about computer memory, but this is sort of memory embedded in textile.
Yeah, and for me, that memory's both something you can articulate and something that you can't articulate a lot of the time. Like, it's very easy to tell stories if you are talking about your item, but I think there's something about the way fibers get worn down and take the shape of a body and movement, that there is a kind of embedded memory, and the way that certain fabric feels against your body is a trigger for a certain type of memory, I would suggest as well. And my favorite thing to do is to take off a pair of tights, or I'm always surprised, I don't know if you've ever worn tights, but if you take them off and you hold them up, they're literally the shape of you can see the curve of your leg in the tights. And I've always thought of that as a very specific kind of memory, like a ghost or a shadow or something.
And clearly your work is about human narratives, but it also has a large significance today, given what people are talking about, the wastefulness of the garment trade. And you're basically fixing things that things used to be fixed before we would just go and buy another one. Yeah.
I mean, that's undeniably an element of the work, but I teach mending a lot. I teach a ton of mending classes. Everyone wants to learn to mend. And since the pandemic started, it's been really intriguing. Lots more people want to learn to mend. I feel very strongly with clothing, there's no point in mending something you don't love, because you won't love it once it's mended. It won't make any difference. So you're really looking at being selective with your mending, but also historically, say you look at the Make Do and Mend campaign of the 1940s and 50s, which the government put out. That was an active propaganda campaign to make people feel like they were doing something patriotic, because it was an era of rationing and not very much materials. So mending was a necessity, whereas now we have a glut of materials. We have so much fabric, and it truly is cheaper to buy. Financially cheaper, not necessarily environmentally cheaper. The impact on the environment's massive, but it is cheaper to buy new a lot of time than to take the time to mend something, whether you have the skills or not. So you're looking at the motivation around care a lot of the time is what I'm thinking about, and why you'd want to look after something in the first place, which is why I sort of grounded a lot of the work in something human. And what people love is so subjective. So, the band t-shirt that's worn to shreds, that they really want you to sew up the holes in the armpits. I'm not judgmental about what deserves to be mended or not.
One of the things that's always kind of intrigued me about clothing is that it is largely still the same kind of stuff that people would have been wearing 50, 60, 70 years ago. It's kind of fabric that's stitched together. I mean, yeah, trainers are made of molded plastics, and outdoor gear is kind of seam welded and things like that. But by and large, it's still fabric, isn't it? It's still fixable. I mean, you can't fix a computer or a phone anymore, because there's, as I discovered, if you break the back of your iPhone, you have to throw the phone away because all of the components are glued internally to the bit of glass.
Yeah.
Why is the garment industry still so stitch fixated?
I don't.
Why are we all wearing space coats?
I mean, there are huge innovations. Amber's going to talk about it. There are massive innovations. I'm not really. I don't know how to answer that question exactly, because I don't really, I'm engaged in textiles more than I am in fashion, though they go hand in hand a lot of the time. I know that there's a pair of Coptic socks, for instance, and at both the British Museum and the V&A, that I find insanely moving, because they're bright red, and you think, okay, so 3,000 years, 2,500 years ago, you still had to keep your feet warm. So the concerns about warmth and comfort and style and looking good were the same. That you wanted, the pharaoh buries himself with a pair of magnificent socks because he wants to look great when he goes to the afterlife. I think that's it. And then someone was telling me that, I had a student in a workshop the other day who told me that they found evidence of darning on the wrappings of Egyptian mummies. Again, it's like, wow, the clothing is still significant and important to you. I mean, I guess what I love about one of the things I love about textile processes, weaving, knit, stitch, in terms of construction, is they've changed. I mean, they're incredible Japanese knit machines which will digitally knit you things versus a frame, a very basic loom that you can still use. But the fundamentals are still quite similar. The innovation is there with materials and different techniques, but our bodies still sort of stay the same, I guess. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Maybe that's it. It's our bodies that are
our bodies have
to change.
Yeah, exactly.
Good point. Okay, let's go to Lauren now. Lauren?
Hi.
Hi there.
Okay, I'll share my screen with you. Okay, can you see the first slide?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, as I introduced myself earlier, I'm Lauren Godfrey. And as I said, I'm an artist. I studied fine art and sculpture, and I am very kind of, I really like where the world of design and fine art sort of merge, and the kind of the spaces in between those two worlds. My work spans fountains. This is a fountain that I made during a residency at Villa Lena in Tuscany last year. I made the kind of focus of the residency was to make a series of fountains, and they had a clay studio, so I worked with clay and made a series of ceramic fountains, and I collaborated with a plant what are they, like plant curators called Blel from Copenhagen, and they did the installation in the back. So that's a kind of rolling installation. So future residents at the villa will be able to install their own selection of plants in the back part. And this fountain in the foreground is supposed to kind of mimic the bell tower on the building that you see behind. I made a Beanie Baby dispenser for somebody's pet Dachshund. I went on a residency to New York in 2016, and the emphasis of that residency was to create bespoke work for people that I met along the way. And at the time I was, and still am, very interested in making things with really precise use. So I went round to a woman called Stefania Pramer's house, who I met in the airport on my way to New York for the residency. And her pet dog destroyed a Beanie Baby toy while we were there. And I decided that the work that she needed was a kind of endless supply of soft toy beanies. So they come out of the bottom and she can give them to her dog as she wishes, although she doesn't use it as she doesn't give them to her dog. She says she uses it as a sort of calendar to show the days passing. changing the beanie that erupts from the bottom. I have a series of works which are ravioli paving slabs, and these are sculptures which depict a recipe for a pasta dish in jesmonite, brass and perspex. And this one's rigatoni alla amatriciana. The really nice thing about this series is that often they're commission based, so people will ask me to make their favorite pasta dish in paving slab form, and there's, much like Celia was saying about this kind of moment of delivering the work back to a person with the jumpers. When I deliver the work, often there's a kind of unwritten rule in the handover of the work that they have to make me the pasta dish that I've depicted. So we have this kind of exchange, and there's obviously nice conversations that come about. You might notice that most of these aren't very textile based. So I have this series that I do, which came out of a sort of a stuck moment in the studio, actually, where I just started drawing the clothes that I was wearing. I took off the jumper I had on and opened a book of kind of pattern reference and started drawing these pattern portrait images in coloured pencils, as a kind of way to loosen my hand and free my brain from the sort of the trying to squeeze out some sculptures in the studio. Sometimes it's kind of hard to get started, and I always used to use screen printing when I was at university as this process, because it had a kind of start to finish process. But in absence of screen printing facilities in my studio, I started doing this drawing series, and it's a really useful loosener, and I find it quite meditative. So it's an ongoing series which I do as portraits of individual people, also as commissions, but also just things that I have around. And I'm a real magpie for pattern, so I'll gather as much as I can, and there's often new things to draw from. I was invited in 2019 to do this in the window of Selfridges, which was really nice because I was allowed to kind of go wild on the shop floor and pick all the clothes that I wanted to draw patterns from. So I was there in the art tank for a day, drawing from the collections. And one of the drawings, this one here, was one of the resulting drawings was used for a billboard at Kingsgate Workshops, which is in West Hampstead. It's a really nice exhibition space and studio building, which I did a residency at a few years back, and they've been really supportive and keeping in touch with my practice. And they invited me to do this billboard, so I blew it up really big. And it was kind of the first point at which I thought about the drawings on a different scale from sort of paper on the table or in a frame. At the beginning of this year, actually kind of in the midst of lockdown, I was invited by Rebecca Heald and Vicky Hayward of Company Place to do a project at Coldrops Yard. And there was quite a lot of restrictions in the project. I needed to make something colourful. They wanted something to kind of entice people back to the outdoor spaces and sort of shake off the cobwebs. It needed to be sustainable because it was only a temporary project. It had to have a sort of conscious presence in the world, and it needed to be socially engaged. So I was working within these kind of restrictions. I decided that I wanted to do the pattern portrait series. So I hosted a few Zoom workshops with two groups of students, some from Central St Martin's Textiles department and some from Store, which is a design school on site at Coldrops Yard. And the students drew from patterns in their own homes. I asked them to assemble kind of fabrics, furnishings, clothing that had pattern, and we sort of worked on them together. Then they sent me all their drawings and I digitized them. So this is one of the students, Leah, did this drawing, and then this is the kind of digital version of her drawing, which I then kind of made a focus in on. And that then is this strip, the first strip of flags that you see there is Leah's drawing. So in this way, they're kind of portraits of the individuals that use the Coal Drops Yard area, and also of the kind of surrounding area, because it includes Central St Martin's and the kind of store that's present there. This is me in the space wearing the flags, so the flags are made from hemp. It's a sort of hemp cotton mix, and the focus from the start was that there would be an end use. That was the kind of way that we built in the sustainability to the project. So not only is the hemp biodegradable, but before they get that far, they're going to be made into clothes. So when they come down, which is on Monday, this coming Monday, the flags are coming down, they're going to be taken to Ventura Foreman, who are a clothing brand manufacturer, who are going to turn them into clothes that you see here. So there's going to be hats, trousers, masks, shirts, jackets, and that will be available in spring summer 2021. So that's what I've been up to.
Cool. And that project's a sort of reverse laundry project, isn't it? I suppose, instead of putting your clothes up on the washing line, you're taking the flags down and turning them into clothes. I'm glad you did show some textiles at the end there, because my first question was going to be, so where are your textiles? But since we're talking about intelligence in textiles, for you, since you work in all kinds of different materials, when you're working in a material, do you feel like you have a relationship with the material and it has an intelligence, that it's saying something to you? Or is it a dumb piece of cloth or a dumb piece of metal that needs to be cut or bashed into shape and bent to your will?
I think you know the answer, that it's the first one. I have a real kind of almost visceral, precise urge towards certain materials, and likewise a kind of repel against others. And I think that's also goes back to what Celia was saying about the kind of instinctive feeling of fabric on your skin, or the kind of way that one material butts up against another. So I'm very precise about those things, and it was interesting to work on a textile project and to try and sort of be responsive to what was being offered, but also steer my expectations of what I wanted the fabric to do. And in the end, the hemp, we explored many options, and Seetal was a consultant on that as well, in terms of the materials that were on offer. Ultimately, having gone down all the avenues of nylon made from plastic bottles, applique with secondhand parachute material, all these kind of different avenues, it actually came back to the sort of simplest, most wholesome hemp, which was the most suitable both for the flag purposes and for the end users' clothes, because we were aware it had to have that functionality at the end.
And we're here during London Craft Week. When you're working, do you draw a distinction between craft and machine processes or computer-driven processes? I mean, do you mind? Is it important to you that you work with your hands, or would you happily turn to a machine if it could do an equally good job or a quicker job?
I do a bit of both. I quite like sometimes the process of sort of using laser cutting or aqua cutting to kind of give it one remove from the hand, but there's often quite a tactile way that I'm approaching those processes. I think it depends on the project, and I'm really keen to sort of use the best for the job, I suppose. I mean, I made an edition last year, which was a folded brass ring that looks like a piece of farfalle pasta, and that was a kind of really very much combined process, in that they were laser cut brass sheets, and then I hand folded and polished, and it was a very hands-on craft based process after the fact of having been laser cut. So there's a bit of mix.
I did a craft and technology course when I was young, long time ago now. And I remember the teachers would always wind me up because I was always looking for the quickest way to get something done. And I'd be sort of struggling in the workshop trying to do it by hand. And then they'd come in and when I'd almost finished and say, oh, there's a brand new machine down there that can do that. They still wind me up about it. I don't think I had the patience or the skills to be a craftsperson. But for you, is there a joy in working in materials? Do you sort of look forward to going into the workshop and choosing your materials and getting your hands on them?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was my kind of journey into doing what I do was sort of along the way. I explored ideas of doing costume making and various things. I did National Youth Theatre costume course, so I made lots of garments at that time, and I've always had an interest in that. And my mum studied weaving, so she's kind of, that's carried through osmosis to me, that kind of tactility of materials. And my dad's a sculptor, so he also is very hands-on, and I would spend a lot of time in his workshop sort of touching things and feeling how they felt. So I think yeah, it's a real pleasure. It's kind of, I need that for my sanity.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, let's go to Amsterdam now, but Amber.
Hi guys, so let me just try and share my screen. Once more. Yes. Cool. Hope you can all see that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Perfect. All right. So how do you run a fashion house without touching a single piece of cloth? And how do you turn one of the most unsustainable industries into one of the most sustainable? And how do we even dress our future selves if it is even still a body at all? Like, I always love to ask this question, even in the times that we're in right now. Maybe in the physicality, we could have been together in a time before this year, but everything has changed. And we need to look for new ways to express ourselves. And as the Fabricant, we are a digital fashion house. We create clothes that only exist in a digital space and never exist in the physical world. We try to create a new fashion narrative for the 21st century, because we really believe that we need to look at ourselves, and we need to look at ourselves in the mirror and see if our vanity really needs to harm the planet in this way, and if we can also do that in a different way. What you see here is one of our fashion experience that we've created, and we really believe in the combination of this new generation that is able to dress themselves in a digital world. Like, I'm a millennial. I come from a background in which I grew up with digital and physical at the same time. But the generation below us doesn't even see the difference anymore between physical and real. And most of them have multiple accounts to create their digital identities, which is a very interesting fact at the moment, is that your digital identities are actually looking different everywhere. For instance, I think that your Tinder profile might be very different from your LinkedIn profile, but all of those are part of your identity. So we try to see what reaches beyond the identity of the human in its physical form and how it develops. And we also try to question the way things are designed. So what you see here is this is our fashion show that we created back in 2018. And what you see on the left is an image of an algorithm which we used to inspire the collections that we created. So basically, I worked together with a scientist who developed an algorithm which used images of Paris Fashion Week and then generated new pixels from there, which really made us question, like, who is the designer here? And how can we use this technology to create shapes that we've never seen before? Like, for me, this was very interesting as a designer, because I would have never come up with this shape. But is it then me designing the clothes, or is it the algorithm? Because the algorithm itself doesn't even understand what it's creating. So we give the meaning to whatever is created. And that's how we always like to work, is hand in hand with the computer, and the human together, because we believe that technology can take us further. And why digital fashion, you might ask, because why is it necessary, right? Why would you want to dress yourself digitally? As I'm educated as a traditional fashion designer, so I learned everything at my school, how to sew, how to make patterns. And actually I had the opposite reaction of everybody here, which was that I got really sick of all the material that I was using. So I was using, my whole room was full with stuff, and I just couldn't, sort of get rid of it and see everything through it. And the physicality of things is something that I never really enjoyed, which is until I did a semester at my school, which was all about digital design and craft. And also because the physicality made me sick because of all the materials that we were wasting. And right around the time that I was studying, documentaries like The True Cost came out, or like the big disaster in Rana Plaza happened, which is something that really took me to heart. And I thought, how can I, as a human being, create more onto this pile that is already there? I felt like a huge responsibility for the future of the industry, which is why I started questioning physicality altogether. And when I came across this semester, I learned about 3D modeling, and I remember I loved the freedom of it, because I felt that when I was a kid, when I was playing games like The Sims, I could endlessly shift identities, and I loved the fact that I could, download new looks and, get purple hair and really change my identity within the click of a button, which resulted me to graduate with a full digital collection. So I asked my teachers, like, hey, can I graduate with a digital collection? And they looked at me like I was nuts. Like, they didn't believe any of it. They said, like, well, fashion is physical, it doesn't work. Get your head out of those VR glasses. But they gave me the space, and I could graduate with a digital collection in which I imagined a world where we would wear one physical garment. So like a very comfortable suit, which would make us feel warm and comfortable. And over that, we would wear like a holographic layer of expression. And that's the image that you see here, which was an installation, which represented that in a sense. And then after I graduated, there was absolutely no jobs in that subject. And it made me realize that I needed to create it. And I ran into the right people, which I'm very grateful for. And together with my co-founder, I started Fabricant back in 2018. And our first fashion show was this. Shown in 3 different places in the same week, and we didn't have to ship any collection, we didn't have to hire any photographers, we didn't need any models, we didn't even need to fly to the desert to photograph this. Like, there was so much going on in this image. We also sort of tried to criticize, the fashion industry being online anyway, because everybody watches the fashion shows on Instagram rather than being physically there, because there's probably 100 people there. So we put some people front row on things that flew by in space, and we really tried to question if the same emotional experience could be created through digital. And that's why we always try to question as well, like what kind of materials that you can use within the digital space. Like, would you want to create a fur out of internet cables? Or would you maybe want to have purple skin and orange eyes, like all these things, instead of, creating bigger boobs or bigger ass? You might ask yourself, like, hey, do we want something else that is not possible in the physical reality? And experiment with that, which is always the question we love to ask. And you might ask the question as well, like, how do you actually wear these digital clothes, right? How do you wear them? And at the moment, we are experimenting with lots of different ways, from which one is that we are actually giving out our garments for free on our website, and you can download them. They're 3D models, and if you know how to use them, you can wear them. As you can see in this image, there's 3 different avatars, these digital humans, They are wearing our clothes that they downloaded for free on our website, so they know how to use the files. And right now, that is still one of the only ways. Together with this, so we are experimenting with how you can wear clothes in the digital space, which is this is Sansar, which is actually a game, a VR game, in which you can create your avatar and walk through VR worlds wearing the clothes. So our collection is also there. But it's still, like, to us, we're still all the time researching this. And instead of our craft, like normally our craft would be cutting patterns, but we have the highest resolution screens and not scissors and cutting tables. So for us, this is an entirely new craft. And instead of calling it haute couture, we like to call it thought couture, because it exists beyond the physical, just like a thought. And this is one of our dresses that got sold off on an auction on a blockchain. And it got sold off for $9,500. And the new owner is a very unique piece of code, which is coupled to this dress. And the new owner wore it on her Facebook and on her Instagram, while we never even saw her in real life. So it really shapes this new perspective, which is what we always try to question. And right now, one of our garments is actually on auction on Vogue Singapore. So this is one of the garments that we created, which is completely inspired by energy pathways that move around the body. And it's a gender fluid avatar, so gender non-conforming shapes. And we always like to dress people, and dress bodies not directed to really body fitting, but really trying to dress multiple people in one dress. And currently, we're actually developing a platform where people will be able to wear these clothes with their own avatar. But this is future scenario, which is very interesting, but we're building that at the moment. So much more to come. And I always love to end up with a quote by Isaac Asimov, which is, "Things don't need to be real when they seem to be." Thank you.
Thank you very much. And talking about textile intelligence, I mean, the garments that you're designing appear textile-like, but is it important that they have any of the characteristics or qualities of actual textiles? I mean, they look like clothes that you could actually wear.
Yeah, we always love to, reference things from reality, because if we go too far away from that, people won't be able to understand what's going on. Like, you always sort of need a reference to reality in order to connect to it. And I'm seeing in the future that we could work with much crazier materials like water or fire or any, like, that's still physical reality, but like crazy new materials, let's say. So things that don't exist yet. And I think in a way it's always based off references from reality. But we always try to play with that. So it's quite important that a silk feels like silk if you're trying to tell the story with a fabric. And the interesting thing is that the software can create that, which to me is completely crazy. Like, you can put in a bit of code and it will behave like a physical silk, which is, yeah, also still mind-blowing to me.
It's interesting that you said that you didn't enjoy working with physical materials. It sounds a bit like my story. I ended up working in the digital realm of journalism. Yeah. But when you're working on these outfits, do you consider that to be a craft? Do you consider that you're making clothes with your hands or with your brain cells, or are you just instructing an algorithm, telling it what to do?
No, so all of the clothes that you see here have all been crafted by me in the 3D modeling software. So we use 3D modeling software to create these garments, which means that it's a craft on its own, because it's quite complex to learn, actually. And it is totally different from the skill set that I learned at school. Like, to work in 3D, it's an entirely different story, and especially 3D fashion, because the realm has not been explored at all. So a lot of times, also people that work with us, like, it's really hard to find people that are skilled within this new sort of craftsmanship, because it's so new that a lot of people don't really know the work that goes on behind creating an image that looks like this. Because you can quite easily create a digital garment, but can you make it look hyper real? And does it even need to be? That's also a nice question. But I love to always play with sort of the physicality and the digitality and how that sort of integrates with each other.
And it sounds like you were experiencing some kind of fashion lockdown 2 years before everyone else, because of course the fashion brands have had to find ways now of they've been forced to present their collections in a virtual way. But have you found that interest in your work has picked up since people have been isolated at home? Are they more now interested in projecting a fantasy of themselves that they can do from their bedroom without having to go out into the real world?
Completely. Like especially also, you know, from brands, we got a huge interest. So a lot of brands wanted to work with us. That's one. But also because they couldn't do anything else. So that was the only way forward, was to do a digital show. But the consumer itself also, we saw a huge interest in expression within this digital platform. So games like Animal Crossing sort of suddenly had like a lot of popularity. Characters which were representations of themselves, which could still go outside in this world to meet people. And also during lockdown, we had great timing, because like in April, we launched our beta of the platform that I was talking about in the last slide. So it was actually an experiment, and people were able to create their own avatars and wear our clothes for the first time. And I saw like there was, I think in the end, there was like about 10,000 people that actually used the app to wear these clothes, which to us was completely crazy, because I've never dressed so many people in my life, but they were all sort of dressing themselves. And even though the avatar was bald and it looked horrific, like I wasn't happy at all with the first version. We tried to put it out there anyway, and there was a huge interest for people wanting to express themselves. They said like, oh, finally, you know, I can express myself again the way I would in the real world, because I'm no longer stuck in my pajamas, but I can actually, you know, dress myself the way I want to. So yeah.
And do you think, I mean, if lockdown continues, which it looks like it will, do you think that people will start to find identities and ways of socializing and ways of behaving online, and then not need to go back into the real world? Do you think it could become a reality?
I think to a certain sense, yes. And especially if technology is developing in the way it does now. So I always like to come back to, you know, the idea of having this virtual reality suit in which you know, have haptic feedback, in which you can feel virtual objects and actually really be in this reality. And this opens up even a more philosophical question, which is, you know, we are seeing our reality today, but, you know, is it even a reality? Because if it feels like, and it looks like, and it behaves like reality in the virtual world, how do we still know it's reality, right? How do we still know it's virtual? And I think at some point the technology is going to go there. Right now, I do feel still feel like a lot of human connection is important, and I do feel like, you know, I really missed hugging my friends, for instance. So, you know, I at first I was full believer of, yeah, always like digital, but now that I've had like to live a digital life, I realized also, okay, human connection is really important. And how I would see it is that the virtual world will become more populated with interesting expressions of ourselves, and in reality, we will have a more sober expression of who we are, and we can sort of express ourselves crazily in this digital world, and in the physical world, we can be more sustainable, let's say.
Cool, thank you very much. And Seetal?
Yeah, okay, great.
Going over to Lagos?
Here we go. Okay, share my screen. Okay, so I will be very quick, I think, because I know time is running out. So we have a picture of eggs here, and how I kind of describe working with textiles and materials is very much how we cook. We have a single ingredient, but it can be cooked in many different ways. So it's very much about the process in which this particular ingredient is cooked in order for us to have an entirely different textural experience, basically. So obviously we know eggs can be fried, scrambled, poached and baked even. So all of these different textural qualities allow for us to not only experience it differently, but all the textures are entirely different. And also it's really looking at how to kind of apply this ingredient in to its fullest potential, which is what I think chefs and cooks do really well. And I call this algae 10 ways. So algae is a material which actually, well, it's an organism that exists within water. So it's not taking up any land space, and it's incredibly intelligent because it also supplies up to 80% of the world's oxygen, and it's existing in pretty much all of the waters around the world, which makes up 70% of our planet. And knowing that it provides this much oxygen, we need to kind of make sure that we take care of it. But knowing that this material, well, this organism is very renewable and regenerative, it means that I don't think we'll ever really run out of it as long as we make sure that we give back with this particular organism. So I will just show you how smart this particular I would describe it as a textile, but it is also material. So Julia Lohmann, she works with it with its strength. So this is kelp in a very human scale structural quality. So this is looking at its strength. And this is looking at its biodegradability, so potential plastic alternative. And this is looking at it as a yarn. And Ninka, she looks at it as fiber and also color. So the entire rug here is made from seaweed fiber, and all the color is derived from seaweed also. And then she's translated it into pieces of furniture with the fiber, as well as paint, and also the objects that you see on that little side table are biodegradable plastics as well. So a lot of the residues she's left with get placed onto color and objects. And then this is looking at how the entire system of the seaweed actually is looking at it as a solid surface. So Jonas and Nikolai actually look at it, well, they use the sticky, slimy substance that naturally exists within the seaweed itself and apply that as the binding agent. So they don't need to use any adhesives to make the solid surface. And then insulation for architectural structures. And this is a very sort of traditional way of applying, well, this is a more modern and contemporary interpretation of how seaweed is applied to architecture, but in Denmark, they apply seaweed as thatching on coastal regions. Or food, for example, so Space 10, they are IKEA's innovation lab, but obviously algae is a very culturally significant dietary sort of ingredient within Asian cultures, but they're looking at it as a speculative future for IKEA's future meatball. Or an entire building that's powered by algae, so it's energy also. Or ink for fabric and for paper. Or it can actually be a device that could potentially power your home using digital technology as well. So for me, this textile and material has inherent intelligence, but also has embodied intelligence because the people working with it know exactly how to work with it. There's an emotional intelligence with it also, because in some cases, there's a familiarity. And then I think there's a sort of digital intelligence to it also. So I'm kind of a bit of a conduit between everybody that is present here today. So I kind of support all of the worlds that Amber, Celia, and Lauren are creating. So that's kind of a bit of a summary of how I see textile intelligence.
Thanks, Seetal. And in your experience, I mean, we're all aware of how wasteful the garment trade is. We're all aware of issues around kind of the reuse of materials, recycling, circular economy, and things like that. Do you see the demand changing within the industry? Do you think we're going to reach a point where textile is used responsibly and we're growing it organically and things like that, or is the industry sort of wedded to this wastefulness, do you think?
I think there's a lot more people are aware of how they need to change. I think it's very behavioral to begin with. We need to almost change the way that we behave, our consumption habits needs to change, as well as the people designing these particular products need to change the way that they are produced and the scales at which they're produced in. So for me, there are definitely a lot of alternatives out there. They just need the financial sort of infrastructure for that to be kind of supported, really, and investment for that to happen. So Faber Futures, for example, they are an agency where they look at color that derives from bacteria, and the bacteria is within soil. And this color is naturally inherent within the bacteria, which they want to place onto textiles. And this is incredibly smart because it's not using any water, pretty much zero water. It's being cultivated in a laboratory, so it's not using any kind of chemicals, and it's not harming any waterways or any water streams and this kind of thing. So there is a huge drive for those kinds of inventions to be put out into the world, but it needs the financial backing to do so. But we also have so much available to us to basically reframe and relook at in terms of the systems that we already are presented with. Because I think a lot of what we're presented with are systems where it's surrounded by capitalism. And I think we can manipulate the capitalistic industry to offer alternatives within that framework. So I think we have to look at alternative scales or alternative models within what we're presented with. So I think there are many options. There's not one answer, basically. For me, there are lots of possible futures, basically.
And talking about textile intelligence, I mean, natural materials at least have the intelligence to know when their time is up, and then they kind of like decompose naturally and will get eaten by something else. What about artificial textiles? Do you think we'll reach a stage where they become something that can last forever or can be endlessly reused? Do you see the field as being either natural and inherent intelligence or artificial? Do you see a distinction between those, and which is the most useful for the future?
I think I would go back a bit with that question actually, and start from the fact that as designers, we need to almost start the process with end of life, basically. So we need to understand like what we're working with. So really understand the materiality, the materials that we're working with, in order to know their life cycle. There's no point in us designing anything if that isn't present within our methodology or our practice, because therefore we actually have the responsibility to do that. So there's not much awareness, I think, or knowledge around materials and textiles, actually. I think that's becoming more known. But I think the language already around materials is something that's too limited in order for us to understand what that means for its end of life. So much work needs to be done in order for us to really address those issues, because even talking about what is a natural material versus what is a synthetic material is really quite challenging to respond to, because we can think about plastic, for example. It actually is coming from oil, which is a natural resource actually, and that is a natural material, but then it's synthesized and it's chemical bound. So it's almost like an organic synthetic material. But do we call that natural or do we call that synthetic? And I think there's so many like complicated questions that surround the material and textile world, that need to kind of be addressed through our language to begin with, in order for us to understand what we're working with. Because the materials themselves, actually, they're way smarter than we are, I would say. So I think there's a conversation that needs to happen between the materials and the humans, and that's the kind of work that I do. So it's very much about listening and observing and to the materials that we're working with, because they also have a voice. We just speak to them differently, or they speak to us differently.
We have gone slightly over time already, because I've been so interested in all of the individual presentations that I've spent way too long talking to either of you. But just to round things up, I'm just going to ask a couple of general questions that I'd like you to all respond to. So picking up on what we were just talking about, Seetal and I, Celia, what do you have a view on natural versus synthetic? Do you have a view on how the textile world needs to change going into the future? Do you have can textiles help us solve pollution and waste, or is there a more of a potential in your kind of repair strategy?
Textiles are the best discipline in the world, hands down. You got no, it's always got answers in it from my point of view. From the kind of work I do, I know that I am drawn to wool, for example. I'm super excited about the way wool ages. So Seetal's point about end of life is quite interesting, because I guess you would class wool as a natural fibre, but the farming of wool is complex. And one of the things I love about repair is you begin with the problem. So you're responding to, when I'm mending something, you're responding to a problem. So textiles, I don't know if I can answer in a nutshell about the synthetic natural, which is better. I just know that from a tactile point of view, I respond to wool, linen, and things that don't scratch my skin. I mean, my response is very gut based and about the way it feels against my body and the way my body knows it. And I think textiles will always do that to us, because we sleep under textiles, we have it on our feet, the soles of our feet. So our knowledge, it would be a very empty experience of our life if our body didn't know materiality against us, you know, textiles against our skin.
And so are you wearing natural fabrics today?
I'm sure my socks, because socks are often knit with a little bit of blended elastic in them because it makes them last longer. I'm sure they have some elastic in it, but yes, I would say I'm wearing all cotton fibre based stuff, but cotton's tricky. But my jeans are very heavily mended, so they've been around for a while.
Lauren, what about you? Do you err towards the natural? Do you believe there's a role in the synthetic? And to take Seetal's point, where do you draw the line anyway? Because you could, as she was saying, everything comes from the earth in some way, doesn't it? So, you know, steel is natural, plastic is natural in a way.
Yeah, I suppose it's easiest to talk about it in relation to the project at Coal Drops Yard. And in the journey to finding the appropriate material, knowing the end of life being clothes, which was something that I was fairly set on, although we did explore options of them being kind of play mats or sort of the flags having different onward uses. The journey and the materials that Seetal offered up, I kind of found myself leaning more towards sort of mulberry silk or things that kind of I found more familiar. Some of the things like Eco Nile and recycled plastic bottle processes. I mean, our particular experience was that they weren't quite at the point at which we could fully rely on their future wholesomeness. A lot of those elements, I mean, for example, we would have had to get the material from America, and in order to recycle it, we would have had to send it back to America, which kind of upset the carbon footprint of the whole project. Likewise, it came down to a certain extent to the people making the clothing, Ventura Foreman, who would prefer to make clothes out of hemp than a sort of recycled plastic bottle. And we were also worried about the microplastics that those materials would put back out into the world. So there's, I suppose, there's something kind of nice about the naturalness of that material that we did choose to go with, and the fact that it's got its own intelligence in that the flags have faded a bit in the sun, and it's something that actually I find really beautiful, and have kind of we knew that was going to be a potential option, that would happen, and kind of choosing to embrace that and not try and keep things in a sort of permanent, precise vortex of existence and allow them to journey on in their way is something really nice. So yeah, the life cycle.
Amber, in a way, since you inhabit the digital world, this is a kind of interesting question for you, natural versus synthetic, but I want you to try and answer it anyway, especially as you've already told us that you do try to make sure that the clothes that you design have some kind of natural flow to them. They're kind of modeled on natural materials in some way.
Yeah, so it's a really big question, right? What is synthetic and what is natural? And I feel like, you know, I love the fact that the virtual software is able to recreate reality and physicality. Like, to me, that is something so interesting. Like, the first time I used the software to design a piece of cloth or to design a garment, and I saw it move the way it moves in reality, like, I couldn't stop looking at it. I was just so hypnotized and by the fact that a computer was able to do this. But the natural materials, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, I would love to experiment more with the craziness of like materials that don't even exist yet. But like I said, it's quite hard to realize that, and it's quite hard to stay attached to the image itself, let's say, if it's not natural or if it doesn't feel like that, because it can become very scary. And the same is for instance for human representation within the digital sphere. Like, if you make it too real, it's scary, but if you make it not real enough, you know, people won't believe it. So there's always like this threshold between physical and digital, and I think the natural and synthetic really comes into play there. And we really love to play with that aspect. So we use also sometimes pictures in combination with 3D models, in combination with 3D scanning, like scanning rocks and crazy materials, so that we create this sort of like image that people won't really know, and they always also question, like, is it real? And then they also don't really know. So we love to sort of play with that synthetic and real reality, let's say.
And I noticed that even though your digital avatars might have orange eyes and purple skin, they're still human. They still have 2 legs and 2 arms and 1 head. Any sign that, any thoughts that might change? You might start designing for invented creatures or mutants or anything like that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think that is the next step, right? Is like, what does our body want to be when we're free of our physical body? And how do we want to represent ourselves within the virtual space if we can be anything? Would we still want to be ourselves? Or would we want to, you know, be a cloud and know what it's like to be ethereal? Like, all these sort of questions I love to ask. And I mean, I would love to dress a cloud. Like, those kind of things are like, you know, things I would love to experiment with. If you have 5 arms, like, what would a dress look like? And I think it opens up such a new realm of creativity that we haven't seen in fashion for a long time. So to me, it's like about time that we start dressing our virtual creatures and selves. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to seeing that. And final question for all of you. I want you to make one prediction about the future of textiles and textile intelligence. I mean, what will be the material of the future? How will materials and textiles be used in future? Seetal, you first, and apart from algae, any other tips for the future?
I don't know if I would say a particular material. For me, how I would like to see the future of textiles is for the systems to be shifted and for that to be a lot more understood and the complexities to be understood, because it's incredibly complex and the supply chains are incredibly challenging to kind of monitor and understand as well. So for me, I think I would love the textile system and those kinds of ecologies to be reframed and readdressed. And that's the kind of future for textiles I would like to see.
Okay, Celia?
So I'm going to land on wool. I'm not looking for an endorsement from the Wool Board, but I do champion wool. I think it's brilliant. And my dream for the future is I think it's really essential that we educate younger generation and embed in our education system a value for handwork, and that we should really be teaching it alongside literacy and numeracy and value it up there with that. And that's the future for a better understanding of our material world. Thank you. Lauren?
It's a difficult question to answer, and it's not something that I've really considered before. I'm gonna take it back to an element that I forgot to mention in the Coal Drops Yard project, which is that the proceeds from the sale of the clothes go into a fund which puts students into Central St Martin's. So hopefully they'll work out what the future of textiles is. And there's this kind of quite nice sort of circular thing that has happened with this project, where it's clothes that have been drawn and gone through this process to become clothes again at the end, and likewise sort of education or kind of workshops that I ran that have come around in this circle to go back into education again. So I suppose maybe it's not my question to answer, but hopefully the actions that I'm taking at the moment will help to answer the question on my behalf.
The students are going to fix it for us.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And finally, Amber.
I think my view on the future of textiles is that we really need to invest in smart materials that will be able to measure, whatever our body needs, which is something we will wear very close to our bodies, which will become sort of like a second skin, which will measure whatever you would need. And then I think all of the rest of the materials that are wasteful, we should find ways to deal with that in a sense. And of course, upcycling is a beautiful way. But I do feel like the future lies in materials that are smart and that are able to grow with us or even grow on us. And then within the digital world, we can go completely crazy and we can wear a dress made of water, or, lights everywhere, and really become like this new creative expression and really, change your textile according to your mood, like what would you want to wear if you're angry or if you're happy, or within a click of a button, you can change that. So I think sort of the digital material, the future of like digital material will really be about that, like connecting to us as humans in this digital world, let's say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you all very, very much for this digital experience of meeting you all, and hope we can get together in the real world at some point. But thanks Celia, Lauren, Amber and Seetal and London Craft Week for bringing us all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks.